In January of 1950, a jury in Chicago found Preston Tucker not guilty. By then, Tucker's factory had been shut for nearly a year. His company had been dissolved. His reputation had been taken apart in Senate chambers, on the front pages of every major newspaper in America, in a 12-week criminal trial. The man who had built that case against him, who had investigated him, and stood before the jury and called him a criminal, was a United States attorney named Otto Kerner Jr. Kerner went on to become the 33rd governor of Illinois, then a federal judge on the United States Court of Appeals, and then in 1974, Otto Kerner Jr. was convicted on 17 felony counts. He became the first sitting federal appellate judge in American history convicted of a felony while on the bench. The man who prosecuted Preston Tucker for fraud went to prison for fraud. Tonight, we are performing a forensic deep dive into why. In 1944, with the Second World War still in progress, Preston Tucker began designing a car. He was not an engineer by training, he was a salesman, but he understood machines at a level most engineers did not. He had raced cars at Indianapolis, he had designed a gun turret that the United States Navy deployed in active combat, he had built an armored fighting vehicle that the Army rejected, not because it failed, but because it was too fast. By 1946, he had incorporated the Tucker Corporation in Chicago and secured the lease on the largest building under a single roof in the world, the Dodge Chicago Assembly Plant, a former aircraft engine factory constructed during the war. 475 acres, 6.5 million square feet of manufacturing floor, the plant that had produced the engines for B-29 Superfortress bombers. Tucker leased it from the War Assets Administration for $500,000 a year. To put that number in perspective, the plant had cost the United States government approximately $175 million to build. Tucker had secured the future home of the Tucker Corporation for less than 0.3% of its construction cost. He then hired Alex Tremulese as chief designer. Tremulese was a former aircraft designer, a man who had worked on the Cord 810, one of the most visually advanced American production cars of the 1930s, and had come directly from the United States Army Air Corps. Tremulese was given 6 days to design the car. He produced the complete drawings for what would become the Tucker 48 in 108 hours. Look at the forensics. The car that came out of Tremulese's 108 hours was unlike anything on an American road. The Tucker 48 had a center headlight mounted in the middle of the grille, directly between the two standard headlights. That center light was mechanically linked to the steering wheel. When you turned left, the light pointed left. It illuminated exactly where the car was actually going, not where the hood was pointed. Tucker called it the Cyclops Eye. The dashboard was padded. In 1948, the standard American dashboard was rigid steel. Impact at moderate speed was likely fatal. Tucker padded his. Federal safety law would not require padded dashboards for another 17 years. The windshield was engineered to be ejected on impact. A passenger thrown forward in a collision would pass through the glass rather than be cut by it. Again, 17 years before federal law addressed this problem. The car had seat belts as standard equipment, not an option, standard. In 1948, the floor of the passenger compartment featured what Tucker called the crash chamber, a hollow space beneath the dashboard into which passengers could slide in an emergency, away from the point of impact. Every one of these features became federal safety law between 1965 and 1968. Tucker built them into every car he made in 1947. The engine was a 334 cubic inch flat 6 rear mounted, a converted Franklin helicopter engine, 166 horsepower, estimated top speed, 120 miles per hour. In 1948, no American highway had a speed limit above 65. Tucker was not building for the roads that existed. He was building for roads that didn't exist yet. 51 of these cars were completed before the factory went silent, not identical, each one slightly different, because the Tucker Corporation never achieved full production. Each car was hand-fitted, hand-finished. 47 of those 51 cars still exist today, more surviving units than any other pre-production American automobile in history. That fact alone tells you something. When people believe they are watching history disappear, they hide it. To understand what killed the Tucker Corporation, you have to understand what was happening outside its walls. In 1948, the American automobile market was controlled by three companies: Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, the Big Three. They had the dealer networks, they had the supplier relationships, they had the lobbyists, and the government connections accumulated over 3 decades. A newcomer, building a safer car than anything they produced in the largest factory in the country with a national advertising campaign and a celebrity designer, was not a competitor. It was a threat. In 1948, the Securities and Exchange Commission opened an investigation into the Tucker Corporation's financial practices. The specific allegation was this: Tucker had pre-sold accessories to his dealers, floor mats, radios, heaters, as a mechanism for raising operating capital while the factory scaled up. The SEC argued this was fraudulent. What happened next was not standard procedure. Before Tucker had been given an opportunity to respond to the SEC's findings, before a single charge had been filed, a confidential copy of the SEC investigation report was provided to Senator Homer Ferguson of Michigan, also to home state of Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler. Ferguson used the report to hold a series of Senate hearings. The hearings were not a legal proceeding. No charges had been filed. Tucker had not been indicted, but the hearings were conducted publicly, and the press covered them as if Tucker had already been convicted. The Tucker Corporation's stock, which had peaked at $7.64 per share, collapsed. The company's ability to raise the capital it needed to survive collapsed with it. On March 3, 1949, production at the Tucker plant was shut down by the bankruptcy receiver. On June 10, 1949, Preston Tucker and 6 company executives were indicted: 25 counts of mail fraud, 5 counts of SEC violations, 1 count of conspiracy. The man who signed that indictment was the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois, Otto Kerner Jr. The trial lasted 12 weeks. Tucker's defense rested on a straightforward argument. He had done everything he was accused of, and none of it was a crime. The pre-selling of accessories was not a Tucker invention. It was an industry-wide practice. Ford did it, Chrysler did it, General Motors did it. It was a standard mechanism for raising capital in the American automobile industry before a production line was fully operational. The defense also made a larger argument, one that was harder to document but impossible to ignore in the courtroom: that the SEC investigation had not been conducted neutrally, that the confidential report had been weaponized by a senator from Michigan before Tucker was given the right to respond, that the sequence of events, the leak, the Senate hearings, the press destruction, and the stock collapse was not a coincidence. The evidence had already spoken. On January 22, 1950, the jury deliberated for less than 8 hours. Tucker and all 6 co-defendants were acquitted on every count. 31 counts, not guilty. Tucker left the Chicago Federal Courthouse and told reporters he intended to build cars again. He had designs for a new model. On December 26, 1956, Preston Tucker died of lung cancer. He was 53 years old. The factory he had leased was returned to the government. It was sold off to other tenants. The forensic smoking gun here is not in the Tucker factories. It is in a federal courtroom in Chicago. 24 years later, Otto Kerner Jr. did not disappear after the Tucker acquittal. He rose. He became the 33rd governor of Illinois in 1961. He was re-elected by more than 500,000 votes in 1964. In 1967, President Lyndon B. Johnson appointed him to chair the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders. Otto Kerner Jr. became a federal judge, and then, in 1973, he was indicted. The allegation, as governor of Illinois, Kerner had received racetrack stock at preferential prices unavailable to ordinary investors, from a horse racing association. In exchange, his administration assigned favorable racing dates to that association's tracks. The instrument was corruption. The mechanism was bribery. He was convicted in February 1974 on 17 of 19 felony counts: mail fraud, bribery, conspiracy, tax evasion, perjury, making false statements. He became the first sitting federal appellate judge in American history convicted of a felony on the bench. He was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. With a United States attorney who indicted Preston Tucker on 31 counts of mail fraud, was himself convicted on 17 counts of mail fraud, bribery, and conspiracy. Tucker was acquitted. Kerner was convicted. Tucker built cars. Kerner went to prison. The 47 surviving Tucker 48s are not simply rare automobiles, they are physical evidence. Evidence that one man, with no factory heritage, no government connections, and no backing from the big three, built a car with padded dashboards, ejecting windshields, seat belts, and a safety architecture that the federal government would not mandate for another 17 years. Evidence that he was acquitted of every charge brought against him, and evidence that the man who brought those charges was later convicted of the very offenses Tucker was accused of committing. The Tucker 48 is the only car in American history that outlasted its own prosecutor. If you found one of the 47 surviving Tucker 48s at an estate sale tomorrow, padded dashboard, Cyclops headlight, helicopter engine intact, would you restore it to factory specification, or would you drive it exactly as Preston Tucker intended? Let us know in the comments.